The Meter Box. A familiar product to this channel is back with a new lid that finally offers a solution for home miners using a standard 125-volt outlet to measure their power usage in real time. It's available now on their website. Use the link in the description for a discount off your next order. Because of the new lid, they're now running their biggest giveaway yet for the entire month of July, giving away over $7,000 worth of prizes like an 𝐈𝐭𝐬 V1 Mini Classic Plus, a 3600-watt X12 octo miner, tons of meter boxes, limited edition NFTs, and a bunch of stuff from GPUrisers.com. Check out their new meter box and enter this amazing giveaway, no purchase necessary. You may also purchase items for additional entries and even better chances to win. The meter box contest is worldwide, extending through the entire month and ending on July 31st. Winners will be announced publicly on August 5th.
What is going on, miners, and welcome back to the Hobbyist Miner channel. In today's video, we have a special guest, not only a crypto miner, but also a firefighter. Please welcome AreToo. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
Awesome, guys. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn a little bit about our guest here, AreToo, and then we're going to kind of dive into some subjects surrounding crypto mining, fire hazards, electrical best practices, and maybe even some common misconceptions that we as crypto miners make when it comes down to making mistakes that unfortunately cause fires or problematic issues for our mining farms. So are you ready to jump in, AreToo?
Yeah.
Awesome. So when did you start getting into crypto mining?
I got in, I've been interested. It was one of those things I've been interested in a long time. Finally took the plunge in late October of 2020.
Okay.
Started ordering stuff right before the big, things really started to get hot and heavy. And think my first
no pun intended.
Things got up and running around November 2020 is when I started. So
okay, fantastic.
With, 4 RX 580s is what I started with, and now I'm up to about 1.8 gigahash.
Wow. So my next question literally leads right into that. Like what does your crypto farm look like now? If you're to lay out hardware and then also diversity in what you're mining.
So right now I have, like I said, about 1.8 gigahash. Everything that I have is currently NVIDIA with a couple RX 580s that I've kept for spec mining some other stuff.
Okay.
But the majority of all of that 1.8 gigahash is all NVIDIA. All 30 series cards that I've acquired over time. Anything, mostly 3070s is going to be the majority of it. Mostly open air rigs. I did get a octo miner with the last minimum order quantity.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Cards, I got my 3080s and 3090s in there.
Awesome. Yeah, good for you. I mean, it's that's fantastic to hear. I mean, a few things there. First, few 580s, good for you. I love my 580s. AMD is my bread and butter. The NVIDIA, the 3070s, great choice. All around fantastic card. Will kind of be the pinnacle when Ethereum's proof of stake goes away. It'll kind of be good on everything, so you kind of set yourself up for that, which is great. And then to hear an octo miner, that's awesome. It's not your everyday miner's choice. But once you get hooked on one octo miner, it's rough to go back. So did you go to the octo miner just from a airflow and cooling perspective, or what kind of pulled you towards it?
Yeah, when I started getting the 3080s and 3090s, that's when I really started looking at the octo miners more. I love them. I mean, not only for the airflow, but for the space saving versus the open air rigs. It's hard to beat. You get a server rack, put them in there, and put them sideways in there, and you can stack them, 4, 5, 6 high on a server rack, and a lot of space saving. So
yeah, I totally agree. My shed build that I'm currently doing now, I was actually running the electrical today, so it'll be funny. We'll talk a lot about electrical, but that's exactly my mindset. It's like putting my server cases out there. They're real easy, save space, get the most out of my shed. So that's really awesome to hear. So are you mining Ethereum? What are you spec mining? Give us the rundown.
So I have 1.8 gigahash all on Ethereum right now. And then I have in my desktop, I have a 2070 or not spec mining, but mining flux.
Okay, great choice.
And I will do some spec mining with that. I've 𝐻𝐿𝐴, I've done that. A couple other little spec mines here and there. And then I have a couple RX 580s and a couple desktops at the farm. One on Ergo and the other one on Flux.
Great choices. So you mentioned
when they came out with the new miner that supported Flux on that. So
yeah, great choice. So you mentioned the farm. So where are you actually hosting all this equipment?
So I have a on my actual farm. I actually have a barn that I've created. I have 400 amps available out there. So
wow.
So it was nice, and I've created a little server room for it that I can work. I got to work on some airflow, but it gives me, they're not in my house. I know, plenty of amperage there, not having to shortcut anything. So makes it very, very easy keeping it out of the house. And
yeah, you kind of check, you check the two boxes. One, massive amount of electric. Two, not inside your home. You've already made some better choices than me at this point. So good for you. That is awesome to hear. Having it in a whole separate location, but at least within walking distance for where you are, that is a great choice, which is fantastic. So let's pivot a little bit here. How long have you been a firefighter?
I've been a firefighter for over 23 years now. I did been full-time for 22 years, and I did close to 2 years part-time before I got hired full-time.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. I think that's fantastic.
My pleasure.
So let's go ahead. We're going to jump into some discussion on kind of crypto mining and fire hazards, and putting those two words together. So what do you feel is the largest mistake crypto miners make when it comes to electrical oversights and like home fires?
So one of the biggest things we see, and not just crypto mining wise, but in general, is overloading of circuits. So if I had to point to one thing that between Facebook groups and not even crypto related, but things that we see on the job is overloaded circuits. And how big of a problem that is, and what kind of problems that can cause long term.
Yeah, I think that just without having the knowledge and background you do, that seems like the most common thing for home miners is like, okay, I have all these rigs, you kind of grow into it, you know how that is. And all of a sudden I'm going to put them throughout the house because I can't put it all in this room because of heat, but also because I overload the circuit and it keeps popping. I mean, that's how I was when I first started. I mean, in my basement, and I learned quickly between burning out power strips. I learned my lesson, running extension cables, in the basement here, and they're just overloading my circuit very quickly, and it just popped all the time. Now, with that in mind, overloading the circuit, why is that such a no-no? Like, why is that so dangerous? Because that breaker pops and it's there to protect us, right? Or am I wrong?
No, that's what they're designed for. But I always go back and say, like everything else, things fail over time. And the problem is once a breaker pops and it continually pops, it's popping because of an overload. And eventually you're going to wear out that breaker. Now that could mean that it pops. It could trip before it needs to, but I've also seen ones that have over time melted and failed, and they failed in the open position. Not that they're never supposed to do that, but it does happen. So the biggest problem with overloading a circuit is really the heat, the long-term heat that you're putting into the system. One of the things that I see a lot of times in older homes, especially that do it, is, or not even crypto mining, but just, electrical usage in general, is the heating and cooling. The expansion and contraction over time will actually loosen fittings. So when when your fittings are tight inside your outlets, inside your junction boxes, inside your wire nuts, that's what they're supposed to be. Over time, that expansion and contraction, multiple expansion and contractions, and the greater the difference of heating and cooling, the greater the expansion and contraction. Over time, you actually can loosen the fittings inside those outlets, the actual wires going in the side. And I've multiple call outs where we've had fires and almost fires just caused by that expansion and contraction, loosening that fitting over time, which then causes arcing. Arcing is obviously a bad thing. The systems are all designed to prevent problems, but they're also not designed to be loaded the way a crypto miner would typically load up a circuit.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, as I mentioned previously, just using power strips and extension cords, I made those mistakes. I mean, and as a new miner, I totally understand. And if one person learns from this, awesome. But yeah, I mean, I went through multiple power strips starting out and I learned very quickly that they're just not meant for it. Like a power strip's not meant to handle 1500 watts that you would put through it.
And that's one thing I notice a lot is people don't look at the ratings that are on the power strip themselves of what they're actually rated to handle. So, you can get industrial grade power strips that can handle that amount, but a lot of times, you see people, going to Home Depot or Lowe's or any open big box store and grabbing a power strip and thinking, hey, this is great, this is what I'm looking for, without realizing that it's not rated to handle continuous loads of 15 amps continuously, and you're going to have a failure of that power strip. Now, the nice thing about power strips is they're designed to, when they fail closed and cut everything, cut your power supply.
Yeah.
But like we said, I like to, when I prepare my stuff and when I teach people, I try to tell people you want to over engineer it, not under engineer it. Because when you start under engineering things or you're expecting safeties to kick in, like everything else, we find production isn't as good as they hoped it is, and that's when problems can happen. So I prefer to over engineer it so I don't have to rely on safeties to take to be there to back me up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely smart. I mean, it sounds like that if your breaker is popping, then you're already too far into it.
Correct.
You're not taking the safeguards you should. You shouldn't rely on the breaker. You should really be monitoring it yourself.
Correct. And the other big thing that I see people doing or reading about is not taking into account everything that's on that circuit. So you can say, well, I have a 15 amp plug here, I can pull 15 amps from it. Well, what you may not realize, especially when you get into older homes at 60s and 70s, they ran multiple rooms on one circuit. So you may have, bathroom appliances, kitchen appliances, TVs, all kinds of stuff, lighting, even sometimes on that same circuit. And you have to account for that when you're doing your math. So going through and figuring out every single thing that's on that circuit, figuring out the wattage of everything that's being used already that you're continuously using, and then taking that away from your available wattage. And that's what I see people fail on a lot, is not taking into account everything that that's on that circuit.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So I think we've kind of nailed down the fact of, concerns over circuits and breakers and extension cords and power strips. So for miners that still want to mine at home, is your recommendation then to have an electrician come in and run a dedicated circuit then just for crypto mining? Because we don't want to say don't mine at home. You could still mine at home, but is your recommendation kind of have something dedicated put in place?
That would be the gold standard. If you're going to do something, have a dedicated circuit. It doesn't even have to be a 220 or 240 volt. They can just run, especially if you're running a single rig, that would be the gold standard, is to have an electrician come out, run a dedicated circuit, that there's nothing else on that circuit. And knowing that when you do your math, that you're below that 80% rule that we always talk about. Because even though a breaker's rated for 15 amps, that is a surge that it's rated for. You do not want to pull maximum 15 amps all the time from that circuit, because then you get the overheating of the wires that it's not really rated for. So that's where that 80% rule comes in. So planning what you're doing, and maybe a little bit of an expansion if that's something that's in your future, having a dedicated circuit ran and doing the math and keeping it under that 80% is going to be your safest gold standard of what to do.
Yeah, that same thing applies as well for those that are listening and learning as we go along. I'm learning, trust me. Is even the same thing applies to your power supplies. 80-20 rule as well. Don't get yourself a 1200 watt power supply and then plan to run at 1200 watts on that power supply at all times. You need to run it to 80% of that 1200 just to be safe. So definitely some great information here. Now, in addition to that, a great thing to bring up is monitoring. People say, well, hey, I got a plug here. What do I do with it? Well, you can use something like a voltage meter, like a kilowatt meter, or do something like a 𝐷ROX meter. What are your thoughts on using those in combination with just mining and also fire hazards?
So at my farm, I run 𝐷ROX meters on all of my lines. So right now I have two 30 amp, 240 volt lines. Both of them have a 𝐷ROX meter on them. I can monitor the actual usage to the watt and all the time. So that would be the gold standard. Obviously, for most people, that's not as easy to do. Although with a lot of, I've seen you and Red Panda talk about the meter boxes that you can put one of those in line. You could make that a 120 volt, plug it into your wall, plug it into your.
They have one coming out in the next like 2 weeks.
Okay.
That actually plugs right into an outlet. So we'll tease it here now. It actually plugs right into a regular outlet, and then the other end of it is set up and ready to go to accept it for a 120 volt. So just like you're saying, it'll be perfect for those types of home miners.
Exactly. The other thing you can do, if that's not a lot, that would be the gold standard. That's what like I said, that's what I run all the time. The kilowatts are a good tool. The big thing the big thing I see is people think they're for continuous use, and they're not. There's something that you're going to put in, you're going to power up your rig, you're going to run it for 12 or 24 hours, pull the, watch it, it usually records highest wattage and stuff like that. Pull that off of it, and then shut your rig down, pull it out of your system, and then that way you have the numbers that you need. I actually made that mistake when I was running a single rig in my home. I put a kilowatt on it and burn it out.
Sounds like Brand. I don't know if you've seen Brandon Coin. He has a picture of one, and his is burnt like in his garage. It's a great example. Like, they absolutely are not. They as AreToo is saying, like, they are specifically made to plug in, test your your watts, so you can record. Okay, great. This rig does X amount, and then unplug it. Believe it or not, the kilowatt, I believe it actually says on their page, it's rated for up to 1800 watts, and that's it. So, like, if you're going, that's something to keep in mind. Like, if you're going to go above that, you got a massive rig and you got it set up, that's something to keep in mind, that it can't handle that as well. So, like, don't put a 2200 watt rig on there, mining Ravencoin or something crazy on it. Because you can burn those out, and those could create fires. I mean, I know Brandon Coins had all discoloration, was brown and everything.
Yeah, mine just failed inside, but still something
that's
that
good.
Obviously your gold standard is running one of those 𝐷ROX meters with a setup. Even we see them a lot like in the 240 realm, but they can run 120 just as easy and provide you that same. For those people that want that, I want to know. Especially with ETH going proof of stake soon, and us switching to all different kinds of coins, and we're going to be going from Ergo low power to maybe Ravencoin or Flux high power. You're going to want to monitor that. That would be the perfect thing to invest in if that's something that you're going to be doing coming up, switching algorithms and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very smart. That's actually something I haven't even thought about or thought about yet, is the fact of, you're not just going to swap from ETH to Flux and your wattage is going to be the same. It's actually going to go up. Some people may have to, upgrade their power supplies. They might have to look at different power options because they can't handle all of that power. So that's all something definitely to keep in mind.
That goes back to testing our circuits and knowing what we're running on our circuit, because what may have been great on ETH is obviously with Flux and Ravencoin and Firo and all that is not working. It's something that is always changing, and we're going to need to make sure that just because you did the math before, the math is still good. Yeah,
no, I agree. In addition to that, I think one thing here that we touched on briefly, but I think it's definitely worth it to get more into is your wiring in your, you had said you run a lot of open frame rigs. And so you're using a lot of PCI cables and wiring and stuff like that. Is there any recommendation you have there with open air rigs on wiring to prevent fires or electrical problems?
So one of the biggest things I recommend is not overloading your power supply and not splitting your 1,000-watt PSU, ATX PSU, and putting splitters on everything. One of the things that I've always kind of questioned people on when they ask me about it is they're like, well, I'm running 4 3080s and I only can fit this many on my PSU, and I'm like, okay, well, at the top of the market, you're running $6,000 in power in graphics cards, and you're not willing to spend the extra 150 to get the power supply extra that you need it to run it properly. So my standard is I don't run any splitters. I know, but I'm also running NVIDIA's 3070s and up. So obviously the power supply, if you're running 6600s, stuff like that, I can see splitters being used safely. But for what I run, I have just a general standard of I don't run any splitters. If you do run splitters, the big thing is make sure you get them from a reputable person or a reputable supplier, making sure that the wiring is 16 gauge or better. I know I've pulled wires that I've gotten off Amazon and stuff like that that have been said they were rated for 16 gauge, cut them open, and they were maybe low 18, probably closer to 20. So going back to just, it may be a couple bucks more, you may have to wait a couple more days, but spending the time and making sure you're getting them from a reputable supplier. I personally don't run, I've moved all the way from ATX PSUs. I run all server power supplies. All my stuff comes from Parallel Miner. I've cut their cords open. Their cords their wiring that they say is 16 gauge is 16 gauge. It's all been measured. So
that's awesome.
That's the big thing. So making sure that your power supply, you're not splitting it beyond, just because you need if it needs another plug, then you really need to start looking at, do I need to get another power supply? Not, can I split this cord that's been split twice already again to get the number of plugs that I need?
Trust me, I know how it is where like you're building a rig and you're like, oh, I just want to get this rig built, type of deal. And that's why like I always push people, like, have an extra power supply, have the extra cables. Like that's kind of why you have stock, so that you can, it's not going to slow you down, which I think is good. And you're right on the cable. I mean, I had one of my 𝐏𝐷𝐿𝐽 Litecoin mini ASIC miners some time ago. I had a video on it with the veteran miner on, who has more of an electrical background, and him and I were talking about why that 6-pin connector ground and bubbled, like the end of it. And we actually found that the PCI cable was one off of Amazon, and it said it was, I think it was 18 gauge maybe, but there's no way it was 18 gauge. Like there's no way. So I was like, okay, great. So we actually looked at it, and I got a temperature gun to read it, and it was like over 200 some degrees was that actual connector. Like it was crazy. And it was like, and then I replaced it with good ones, and it brought that temperature down significantly, and it ran great, and it was safe. And that was just a good example of like, that cabling was not meant for the load that I was putting over it.
And it's essential to cut them open too, because what I found is you could measure 2 wires up from the outside diameters, and they measure the same. And then you cut them open, and you find out that cheap one off Amazon has 20 gauge wire in it with insulation to make it up to look 16 gauge. So I was gonna say I actually got cables from Veteran Miner, and then also from Chain Critical, two guys that make their own cables. And oh my gosh, not only do they look amazing, let's be honest here as miners, it is nice every once in a while when things look good, but also the thickness is phenomenal. And it makes me feel a little bit better when I swapped all of those PCI cables over to those types of cables, because it makes you sleep a little bit better at night. Yeah, I've done stuff with Chain Critical, and his stuff is top notch. And actually, I've actually cut his open and seen the wire gauge on them, and made sure that they're what they were advertised as. So that's the
great.
Big thing.
That's great. Yeah, and I didn't even think about this for everybody that's like curious as we go through the video today. I'm going to try to put links to a lot of the stuff we talk about in the description. We talked about like parallel miners and stuff like that. We'll put links to all of that in the description so people have a place to go to reference that stuff, which would be good. So moving on, one thing that I think we as home crypto miners entirely overlook is, kind of fire detection and suppression. Like, okay, how do we detect if there's also an electrical fire that we're having? And then how do we deal with it, are kind of the big ones. So are there certain smoke detectors that we as miners should be getting that would do better for detecting these type of electrical fires?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people don't understand there's actually different types of sensing smoke detectors depending on different technologies. And depending on which one, some are good. So a couple of them, you have photo ionization detectors. Which are light sensitivity, and they're looking for particles and for determining the presence of smoke. They work best in low smoldering type fires that can create a lot of smoke. So slow building fires. Typically smoldering or slow building fires create a lot of smoke. So that's why the photo ionization detectors work well for those. You also have an ionization detector, which actually uses charged plates to determine the sense if there's a fire. Those work best for fast or hot fires because typically there's less smoke. So if you have to, obviously the best choice would be to choose, they actually make combination detectors that cover both types of detection. Those would be the premium, those would be the gold standard, obviously. But those are really expensive too. So I would say, typically, if you're looking at a rig that's, since you have one burnt plastics in there, plastics create a lot of smoke. Typically, you're not having a quick ignition with a high temperature fire in there. You're going to have something that's low, that smolders for a while. That cable that you talked bubbled up kind of burns off a little bit, creates that low smoldering fire. I would probably recommend, if you have to choose one or two, a photo ionization detector would be one you want, because that's probably going to detect your low smoldering hot wire earlier than a ionization detector.
Got it. So, yeah, that makes sense. I like that idea. I think, the nice one is that fire detection side. And I'm going to be a cheater. I looked at the notes too a little bit here, guys. And I actually already put one in my Amazon cart, which was a Wi-Fi. I thought this was, I didn't even know this existed, a Wi-Fi connected smoke detector. Like, we're not home all the time as miners. So if something is occurring and your smoke alarm's going off, and it's not like, if no one's home, going off to nobody. So tell us a little bit more about these Wi-Fi connected detectors, because I think this is a brilliant idea.
So one of the most recognizable names that most people recognize is a Nest detector. All it is, and there are, Kitty makes one. There's a bunch of different companies that make them. All they are is they have a small communication system, Wi-Fi communication system that you log into your Wi-Fi network. And typically there's an app that goes along with it, or something that'll send you a push notification when that smoke detector activates. And those are highly recommended for mining areas, because most of the time it's not right around where we are. One thing that we always preach in fire safety is early detection is the key. You want to know early on that you have something going wrong, because once it gets to a full built fire. It's too late. And especially if you're mining in your home, you want to know early. You don't want to know, if you're sleeping at night, and your rig is not right around, say it's in the garage, you want to know. Early detection is the key. That's the safest thing. And so having a Wi-Fi connected or a alerting smoke detector that's going to send a notification to you is going to be one of the best ways that I could say to get that early notification that maybe it's just a smoldering wire, but that could lead to something else. You get that early notification. Now you can go take care of it, pull that, shut the rig down, pull that wire out. Maybe you have nothing but a damaged piece of wire. But that early detection is really the key. And especially for those who don't keep their rigs right in a common area of their home, that's key. That's the early notification that you need to prevent loss and loss of equipment and possibly loss of life is that early detection.
So now I know I need to make that 2 in my Amazon cart, one for my mining room and one for my mining shed that I'm building. Which I'm so glad that you brought that up. So moving on here, I think the last thing we'll really talk about is kind of the suppression side, like the reaction now that a fire does occur or electrical fire does occur. So as miners, what are some things that we should have available to us if we're at home or if we're not at home in order to help deal with such a thing as an electrical fire or a fire in our mining room?
So the first and easiest thing to do, especially if it's something that you're close enough, like if it's in your garage and a mining shed that's out back, have a fire extinguisher in the room ready to go. There's different kinds of fire extinguishers for different kinds of ratings. You have different classifications are A, B, and C. A would be your normal combustibles, wood, paper, that kind of stuff. B is considered liquids, which obviously that's not something that we would typically be dealing with in this situation.
Nope.
And C would be circuitry, so electrical. So whatever extinguisher you get, you want to make sure it's at least C rated. Usually you can get an AC rated. A couple different kinds would be a dry chemical extinguisher. Those do a good job at putting them out. The problem is it will typically ruin everything that you hit with it.
Yeah, makes sense.
If I was doing something and I was putting an extinguisher, I'd probably be looking at a carbon dioxide extinguisher. A CO2 extinguisher, it extinguishes it by suppressing the air around it and taking away the uninhibited chain reaction of the fire. And what that will do is put the fire out, but typically not ruin everything else in that room, because
so it doesn't leave like any residue behind or anything like that. That would just go right on top of the circuit board.
Correct. Where your dry chem is going to cover everything. When that dry chem gets discharged, it's not only going to hit that rig, it's going to hit all the other rigs around it. May not cause problems with those, but I would really be looking at a carbon dioxide extinguisher in my shed, the room, or wherever your rigs are, having one there and available so you can use that, put out the fire and minimize the damage at the same time. Now for remote rigs that aren't close to us or in a mining, something that we can't respond to quickly within minutes, because really when we're talking about a fire, we're talking about you have minutes to respond to it typically. There are a couple options that can be done. One of them would be considered the gold standard would be considered like what you typically see in server type rooms. So an inert gas extinguishing system. So it is usually like what it does is when it extinguishes it, when it discharges and extinguishes the fire, it takes away the source of oxygen and stops that fire.
Okay.
So
that's crazy.
They work best in enclosed rooms. So you can't put them in a large area room. They also have one, there's a couple different types. So depends on how big your system is. If you're talking, 5-6 gigahash, it may be worth it to spend that $500 to $800 to have a single. You can, a lot of times, server farms have large systems. You're talking thousands of dollars. They do make single room, small single canister systems that have a single head that you could put over top of your system. That if it's in an enclosed space would work really well. Still not cheap, especially for the guy running 1 to 2 rigs. But if you're talking these guys that have 5+, then you got to look at it. In my opinion, I always look at it as a dollar cost savings thing.
It's operational insurance pretty much. Like you're insuring that hardware to a degree. At the same time, it's an operating cost. It's just like your electric at the same time. So yeah.
And you can also get, usually if you have insurance in that area, you can get a discount because you can say, I have an automatic suppression system.
That's true.
Which will reduce your insurance rate typically depending on the insurer. So that's something that I would look at or consider, especially if you're talking about going big scale. They typically have to be in an enclosed room though. You can't, like I said, not large area, unless you're getting into, really big systems, then you're talking something else. I know there's been some talk here recently about these, the fireballs, the LD fireballs.
Yeah, I had it on my channel not too long ago. That's actually kind of how you and I got connected on it. So yeah, give us the rundown. Am I crazy or is there actually a use case?
So there is a use case for them. The problem is most of the time they're dry chemical. So
which we talked about, yeah.
If they discharge, they're going to ruin a lot of, they're going to, there's a chance they could take down everything. The only problem I really have with them is if you look at them, they're made to be discharged in an enclosed space. So when they blow, they're made to blow down and then back up on top of the, blow that product back up on top. So if you have one in a large room, you may not get the full suppression effect that you're picturing in some of their videos and sales videos and stuff like that. That being said, it's not going to hurt. Right. I mean, if you have a fire that's hot enough to discharge that ball, you've already lost a lot. Your rig is down. You've lost a lot. So it's only going to help. Because you're not. I mean, the only concern I would have is if I have a larger one, multiple 6, 4, 5, 6 rigs. Now this ball discharges and goes all over everything. Now, how much did I lose because of that? But they work and I've seen them work, but they're really made to be in an enclosed type space or something that can contain that dry chem powder when it comes out and direct it almost to where it needs to be. So,
yeah, I mean, that's why for me, I mean, I had told people too, like in that video, like one, not fire advice. I'm not an expert in any way, but it was like hey, I have a 5x10 room and I have 2 of them in there. It is a closed space. I mean, it is, my hands touch each side of the walls. Like it's small. And so that was my mindset, putting them up at about the 6-foot high level. It would go, if they ever went off, it would cover everything. And I even told people, I'm like, if this goes off, I'm not concerned about my rigs at that point. I'm concerned about my home. Like, yes, the rigs are a lot of money. Totally understand. Like it's an investment. Totally understand. But my family and my home are more valuable to me than my rigs.
Yeah.
So it was like replace rigs. Yep, exactly. And so that's where my mindset was on that entirely, and just kind of giving those warnings. And I actually read on their website some of the specs on it to make sure like they go off at 140 Fahrenheit, but to a flame, not to a temperature. Not that my mining room's 140 Fahrenheit. But that it is based off, my concern was based off of like dry rot almost. Like you're in a dry environment all the time. And would it be a problem? And everything I read was 2 places I read. It's flame. A flame has to hit it in order for it to go off.
There has to be a breakdown. That ball's under pressure. And what happens is the flame actually breaks down the exterior of the ball.
Got it.
Allowing the pressure that's built that was designed to be in there to discharge. So heat over time. Now, that being said, if your mining room or something gets up to those 120, 130 and stays there for long periods of time, I would look at replacing them more often than recommended, because that exterior will degrade over time through just general exposure to heat higher than what the manufacturer would generally be seeing.
Better to be safe and just like replace it. Worst thing in the world is no fire and one of those things goes off over top of your rigs. Oh no, that would be terrible. Yeah, I think, now don't quote me, but I think it was like replace every 5 years. So I feel like for the cost of those, it's like just replace them every year. Like if you really like, they were like, I don't remember the costs on those, but it was like, man, you might as well just replace them every year just to be safe, which is good. So awesome. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, just like I was saying, just because that heat over time will degrade that exterior.
Yes.
because it's higher than, you know, it's outside what can be considered normal room temperatures and stuff like that. So yeah, I would be on the same side. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to just bite the bullet, and every year or every 2 years at the most, I'm just going to swap it out just for safety.
Yeah. So now I have to ask, to wrap things up for today, what fire suppression do you have at your crypto mining farm at your barn? Is it like crazy overkill, or like what do you got?
No, mine, honestly, I just carry a carbon dioxide extinguisher inside of it. So because it's a barn, it's not with my family and stuff like that. It is monitored, so I do have that can send me, you know, the alerts if I need to.
That's great.
And getting that early detection, like we always, it's kind of a fire safety thing. Early detection is really the key. Finding that problem before it becomes bigger than you can handle.
Got it. Well, awesome. Well, that's going to wrap things up for today. AreToo, man, this was awesome. I mean, I learned so much. I appreciate you coming on. I want to make sure people understand. I posted on Twitter and was like, I'm looking for a crypto miner that is a firefighter. And this man jumped in right away and was like, hey, I'd love to talk about it. So huge shout out to you. Hopefully the community learned something today in the 40 minutes that we did have an opportunity to record this. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the comments. I imagine AreToo doesn't mind commenting there and just responding to some of those. I'm going to try to put links as well to everything that we kind of talked about today. So if you guys are like, oh, I need one of those, need to grab one of those, I'll put them down below to make that easier for people to grab. Well, if you enjoyed this type of content, guys, give it a thumbs up. And finally, don't forget to subscribe. Take care.